Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and the other day I decided to play with my Ranger alcohol inks because I haven't used them in a while. So as always, I'm working on my glass media mat by Tim Holtz. Any sort of glass, you know, there's other glass crafting mats, a glass cutting board, etc. is kind of the way to go when working with alcohol inks because they're alcohol inks. They'll stain everything. So with the glass mat, you can wipe it off with rubbing alcohol. So I started with that, and then I have two pieces of hearts here that I die cut from some YUPO paper, and YUPO is polypropylene. It's not actually paper, it's basically plastic. And it's totally recyclable too, FYI. So I started with that. And then I just started experimenting. It's been a while since I've played with them. I had this rough idea in my head of what I wanted. So with this first heart, I literally just squeezed on some, the mixing medium, like over the die cut heart. And then I was like dropping in the ink colors, these different alcohol ink colors. And then I also dropped in the gold Mixative, which is very, very thick. I showed there in the meeting, I was shaking the ever-living daylights out of it. You really need to shake it because it settles into the bottom and there's a little metal mixing ball in there. So with the mixing mediums, you always really want to shake them really, really well. So I did that. And then that little blue thing I'm using, it's actually a little handheld fan. I think you can pick these up at like Walmart, Amazon, wherever. I just like having that to kind of speed up the drying process. I don't like using a heat tool. I don't want to be using anything with heat or anything like that with, you know, plastic and alcohol. Like, you're just asking for trouble. So I just like the little fan for kind of moving the ink around, plus just speeding up the drying process. And I also work in a very well ventilated area. So I think I've covered all the bases with disclaimers. I didn't like the first attempt. It turned into a hot mess and I was like, ugh, no. So I actually just wiped it off with pure rubbing alcohol. I have like 99% rubbing alcohol. It still stains, like the YUPO paper you could see there was stained. But, you know, you can kind of remove it all and start over if you're not happy. And I wasn't. So I did it all a second time, kind of playing around. This time just dropping in the color a little bit more and kind of drying in between each time I'm applying everything. And again, I wasn't necessarily happy with how this was turning out, but I followed my own advice, which I've given many, many times, and I had posted a picture of this on Instagram and, you know, said the same thing, is I set it aside and walked away from it. Just completely ignored it, didn't look at it again, just walked away. Here I actually was picking up, I poured a little bit of rubbing alcohol into just a little ceramic dish I have on my desk, and I was using one of the Ranger alcohol ink brushes to kind of drop the rubbing alcohol because it moves it around. Like, with alcohol inks, really, it's just experimenting. Like, literally, you never know. You can't predict what's going to happen with it. It has a mind of its own. So I set that other piece aside, and with this one, I didn't use the mixing medium at all this time, like in the beginning, like I did with the other one. This time, I just dropped in the alcohol ink directly onto the YUPO paper, and then I would dry it with my little fan there, just to speed up that process. Plus, by using a fan, it kind of prevents it from really moving out like it does. But again, it's an experiment. You could drop it in. I've done that before I had this little fan. I would just drop the color, drop in the next colors, and then just let it do its thing. It's amazing how it'll look completely different from when you start to when you end. So you could also do this on the larger pieces and then die cut afterwards. I'm kind of finding though, if I usually move too quickly and I die cut before the alcohol ink is fully dry. And if it's not completely dry, the alcohol ink will transfer onto your dies, which I inadvertently did. Here, this is where I put some of that rubbing alcohol. This is just a little ceramic serving dish. When people see them in my videos, they ask like where I bought these. Honestly, they were from like an actual big, you know, serving set for food. And I gave away all the other larger dishes because I don't entertain anybody. But I kept these smaller ones because they're perfect for crafting. But any non-porous like ceramic little dish will work. Little glass bowls, those sorts of things, those work great too. So I just use that to put a little bit of the rubbing alcohol in, and then I can pick it up with my brush. And then I also use that, I'll dip like a baby wipe or my cloth into that rubbing alcohol, and I'll use that to clean my glass surface when I'm done. So yeah, I did all that. I set those hearts aside and just kind of ignored them. I wasn't originally planning on using that first one I showed that was kind of a hot mess. But when I came back to it, I was like, oh, I'm okay with this. I like this. It's, you know, it doesn't look absolutely disgusting like I thought it did. So and that applies to everything, not just alcohol inks. Like if you were watercoloring something, like coloring an image, making a card, whatever, and you're just not feeling it, you're really hating it, you're feeling discouraged, put it away, like set it aside, either work on something else or go do something else, you know, go make a meal or read a book or whatever. Come back to it later, because so often I find almost all the time when I come back to it later, I'm like, oh, this is so not what I don't know what I was thinking before. So anyway, for these cards, I pulled out, this is an older set. This is the KRISTINA'S Love stamp set from Simon Says Stamp and the coordinating wafer die. These came out a couple years ago and still my favorites. I've been meaning to use these. So while I'm doing like hearts and like love themed cards like this, I don't consider like specifically Valentine's, even though literally Valentine's Day is in a few days. I like cards like this all year round, you know, just to tell someone you love them. So I die cut the love word from Simon's gold glitter cardstock. And then I'm adhering it directly to those alcohol ink hearts with Simon's craft tacky glue. Just pressing it right down, and then I just put a acrylic block on top of it to let that adhesive dry. So because like I said, this heart that's kind of covered my hands, that was the first one I had done after the second or third attempt, whatever it was. And yeah, it had this fun, cool, marbly looking background. So I was totally fine with it. So I die cut both two sets of the love words and decided to make 2 cards and use both of these hearts because I thought that this totally worked. And then the remaining sentiments from that stamp set, I just stamped onto black cardstock and white heat embossed them. And then I die cut them with the narrowest of the Simon Says Stamp sentiment labels wafer dies. And same thing, I'm just adhering those to those hearts with that craft tacky glue. And then I'd put foam tape on the back of these hearts, like completely covered the back of these. And the nice thing about YUPO paper, just a random little fact, because YUPO paper is the polypropylene plastic, it doesn't warp. So you can adhere it with liquid glues, etc. It's not going to warp like regular cardstock would, you know, when you watercolor or add a bunch of ink, etc. So you can just adhere it directly. But I popped these up with foam tape because I wanted that extra bit of dimension, because these are relatively clean and simple cards because, you know, all the effort went into the actual hearts. And oh, those heart die cuts are also from Simon Says Stamp. They were from the nested hearts die set, and I'll have a link, you know, links and lists and all that fun stuff at the end. So for the inside, I'd white heat embossed the hugs and kisses words from that same stamp set, and then the little and symbol. Rather than heat emboss it, I decided to just stamp it on the inside of the cards with Delicata Golden Glitz ink, just to kind of tie it in with the little bit of gold I used on the front. So I stamped that, and then I adhered those hugs and kisses die cuts to the insides of the card. So just adhered those, and I did this with both cards. I used different sentiments on the front, but then the same, just hugs and kisses, stamps it on the inside, because again, this is just kind of apply to anyone. Just kind of an encouraging, you know, I would send this to a friend, family member, whoever, you know, love you to pieces. Doesn't have to be specifically Valentine's Day. So after I had all that adhered, I wanted to pull in just a little bit more gold because, you know, you got to have the bling. So I have some of the Simon Stay Gold confetti, and I just kind of sprinkled those onto both of these cards. And then once I was kind of happy with how I'd placed them, I'm just going to adhere them into place with that craft tacky glue again, just picking them up with my jewel picker, putting down a dab of the adhesive, pressing those little bits of confetti into the adhesive. And as always, usually, like, I kind of lay out my confetti in sequins and whatnot, but when it actually comes to adhering them, I adhere them in completely different places. It just is what it is. I kind of just go by the seat of my pants, because people do ask, like, how do you plan where you put them? I just kind of roughly triangles, odd numbers, fly by the seat of my pants. So that was the cards for today, and like I mentioned, I will have a link below the video to my blog post. I'll have a supply list with links to all the supplies used, so you can check that out if you are interested. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting on my videos. I really appreciate it. I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye!